If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
The only thing I can say as this season wraps up, where we could be in a worse position is, man, thank God we aren't Oakland. Like, that absolutely breaks my heart. And I wasn't even sure I was going to even bring this up or talk about it, but as I hit record, I'm just thinking to myself, I don't know what I would do if the Pirates moved. And obviously people will mention, the lease is up in, 2030 and, Nashville is vying for a team, Portland and different things like that. But just an absolutely horrid scene out there, packing the stadium. I'm pretty sure the same thing would happen here in Pittsburgh. But, we're not an Oakland A's podcast. We are a Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Myself and Scott going to talk about a decent amount of topics because the Pirates have also made national news this week. So let's get going. Scott, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. It sure feels like the last week of the season. And, yeah, that really was quite the sight in Oakland today. People ripping the chairs out of the stadium. But my boy, J.J. Bleday, made an incredible diving catch. My hometown boy. But he's gonna do well in Vegas, I think.
Or Sacramento first, though, I guess, maybe.
Right.
Playing in a minor league stadium with some extra, seats
Might hit
built
70 home runs next year.
Yeah, it's gonna be an absolute, clown show. Me and my buddy, my neighbor, is just a side story. We tried to make it work to get out to Oakland sometime at the end of August, I believe it was, because his wife for Christmas got him one of those things. Because we take boys trips every year to different stadiums where you scratch off the stadiums and stuff. And of course, the Coliseum's on there, so we were gonna try to make it work, and obviously couldn't. But yeah, it's something you hate to see. And obviously everybody that is a baseball fan is wondering what it would be like if their team was no longer in their hometown. But like I said, the Pirates, luckily maybe that'll overshadow some of the national news that has happened. The Pirates make a move that for some fans was months overdue. Player, did, to his credit, reset himself, take some time off towards the end of May, get his swing back on. I'm talking about Rowdy Tellez. Rowdy Tellez had a very good June, July, and August. Wasn't having a great September. But Scott, this isn't what this is all about. Everybody knows Rowdy Tellez at this point in time. If you don't, you might be living under a rock. Was designated for assignment at 421 plate appearances. 425 plate appearances would have allowed him to make an extra $200,000 as incentives. He had one of those, scales where it's like you make so many plate appearances. And this happens in, almost like prove it free agent contracts, something that you see where it's basically like if you have a good season, if the team has a good season, if you are able to put these together. I remember in the offseason questioning, whether or not he would reach some of his incentives. But I obviously thought maybe if he was a starter for the entire season, the plate appearance one, at least, the lower tier ones would be more than attainable. Brian Reynolds is over 600 plate appearances at this point in time in the season. So yeah, most guys that are on the team for the full season are a starter for most of the season. will reach the lower thresholds. Rowdy obviously has not. We've been talking about this back and forth. So, Scott, I'll let you give a talk here first. What were your thoughts, and what's your kind of like take on the situation here? And we obviously had a conversation about this a couple times before the show.
Well, I was a little sad to see him go because he's a character, and he had a stretch where he was productive. But I'm not going to shed too many tears for Rowdy Tellez, still making over $3 million this year. I'm sure he would have liked to have the extra 200 grand. Who wouldn't? But you talk a lot about taking off your fan hat and looking at these things, and I think that that's where we need to shift our perspective because it's been a frustrating season. We're all in our feelings a little bit about where the team is, where they're going. But when it comes down to it, it's a business. The team is there to run a business. They're business people that are playing the sport, and one of the things that kept being brought up is how are we going to get any quality free agents to come to Pittsburgh if this is the kind of thing that they do? But you framed it perfectly when you were saying that this is a prove it kind of contract. So if they go out, and not to say this is going to happen, but if they go out and get a Pete Alonso for first base next year, it's not going to be the same kind of thing. Yeah, and so I think that him coming in, and this is also a guy who spent a good chunk of last year in the minor leagues. So to look at he was 3 for 26 in his last 10 games, just over 100 batting average. So it's not like he earned a lot of that. If he would have been more productive, I'm sure that they would have kept him around. But he really didn't show them what he needed to show them in a show me contract.
And that's the thing is, and I'm going to give credit to the man who broke the news. And
Absolutely.
as I said before, that didn't even really break the news to break the news. Ethan Houlihan, everybody, on Pirates Twitter knows who he is. He's, starting to get some national recognition now, and
Make
good for
sure you
him
give him
because
make sure you give him credit because Ben Verlander didn't until he
Ben
absolutely
Verlander
got forced
didn't.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it spiraled out where Pat McAfee and Jeff Passan and everything, and good for Ethan because I mean I've met Ethan in person a couple of times out at the Curve games. I have spoken with him countless number of times when I have questions about waivers and minor league free agents and whatever it may be because that's something that he focuses on. But in his words, I mean, he just basically he was putting the fact out there, and he had even, had put a tweet out earlier, saying, he's down to this many plate appearances. Will he make it to this? So he's just making us as fans, aware of something that is of interest to him. And, it does play into, our baseball watching experience at times. But for me, like I was absolutely shocked, and I know you said you were too. Kind of at the way this just really blew up, and to me, it was basically because like I instantaneously thought of two things. I thought of Ethan once again putting out a tweet about it was another player, Craig Kimbrell, who was DFA'd by the Orioles. If he had finished one more game, he would have gotten another $100,000. I believe he had already reached some of his incentives. There was, John Brebbia was another one that he had put out there, Shelby Miller. But then I like thought back to one, and I'm gonna have to look up his name again because I once again forgot how to pronounce it.
Is that what the one?
It was oh goodness, now he's lost in my tabs on my phone here. So this is great. This is great podcasting experience for everybody out there for me to look up how to pronounce a guy's name that you'll forget about in 2 seconds. And
Well, while
that
you're looking
is
that up, let me bring up that Jeff Passan was a big part of this. As you're looking that up, uh, he knows better to go on to Pat McAfee, and I know that they're a bunch of Pittsburgh boys, and it's fun to to take shots at Bob Nutting, and that's fine, and he deserves a lot of the shots that he takes. But Passant knows that this is how the business goes at the end of the season, and the Pirates aren't the only team, as you were pointing out, and as Ethan pointed out, they're not the only team that does this, but they're the low hanging fruit, the pinata that is going to take the hits.
Yeah, and this is Adane Echeverria, the original, his nickname, the original La Pantera. It's not Luis Robert. It's Adane Echeverria was the original La Pantera. But I was thinking about, he was with the Pirates for about 15 games back in 2018, signed a contract with the Mets, which was an incentive-laden contract, that if he played for them in so many games, that he would, make so much more money. Well, he was at 60 games, and it was in his contract that if he played over 60 games, so 61, he goes out there for game 61, he gets a $1 million bonus. What happens at game 60? He is DFA'd like almost immediately after that game. And once again, it was a lot of it was performance based. For the Mets, he had like about a 611 OPS, a 62 OPS plus at the time. But it's just the way that people would see it. It's like through that lens. Like, yeah, did the original La Pantera deserve, to play more games with the Mets? Probably not. But you waited till game 60. It's the perception. With Rowdy Tellez, if they would have DFA'd Rowdy Tellez as soon as Billy Cook came up, and say Rowdy Tellez was at 400 plate appearances or even 390 or whatever it may be, like there would be less of this outrage. And to give Ethan just another kudos is he had put out there David Sampson, nothing personal with David Sampson. He did an episode where he was getting a lot of questions about this. And he said basically the Pirates really didn't do anything wrong. They just waited too long. Like the decision to DFA him, like you were saying, was, he's 3 for his last, 26. It's like he's batting, a little bit over 100 in the month of September. He's not providing anything to a team that is, has no shot at the playoffs. But it's the way that they did it. They're very, like I said, I think I've described Cherington before as just very passive with moves, and he covets those 40-man spots. And I honestly think, Shelton gave the answer, and yes, it's obviously, an answer to cover them from, actually losing a grievance to Rowdy Tellez, which Rowdy Tellez and the MLBPA on his behalf will obviously, file with the Pirates because he was so close to that. The Pirates will be able to state the numbers, that you had said, but it shouldn't have even really gotten to that point. And Derek Shelton had to say, oh, it's because the young guys were coming up. Cherington says it's the young guys that are coming up. And I honestly believe probably Cherington, that's what he was thinking about. He's like, oh, the season's over. We can bring up Peguero. We can bring up Palacios because their season's over. Neither one of them really earned, coming back up. Palacios had been injured, but hadn't been hitting great in the minors. Peguero came on, late in the season, but he's on our 40-man. So we'll just bring him up and put him into a couple games. And, yeah, we'll just let go of Rowdy then. It's not like he's been playing a lot anyway. Yeah, they probably knew about the incentive, but, I mean, who's going to worry about that? Because, he got paid $3.2 million. And it's just that's where the problem comes in, is that, they can't help but, shoot themselves in the foot with these types of moves.
Did they expect these things to come out? Did they expect these to be publicly known numbers? I mean, Ethan finds out and he puts it out there, but I'm sure that when they're negotiating, they don't expect it. And so then you start wondering, are they thinking this is going to fly under the radar? Is Rowdy licking his chops thinking, oh, I'm going to make 200? He's got the money spent in his head already. Or is he just like, well, it's just the business. And I understand. I know that there was a report that they had discussed and that Rowdy had expressed interest in coming back next year, which, I'm sure he's saying all the right things and maybe trying to get a job for next year as anybody would. But I just don't think that they think about these things. We talked before about how terrible they are with PR. And I just don't think that they have it in their heads. They don't run that through of how is this going to look? how is social media going to respond to this? And there have been plenty of things where social media, and you and I on Pirates Twitter, get worked up about, but doesn't really crack into the mainstream. But this one broke through, and I'm sure part of it is, Pat McAfee being a Pittsburgh guy.
Yeah.
That probably contributed to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I honestly think like you hit the nail on the head in there is that I don't think they thought that people would even notice this because, I mean, normally the Pirates put out their transaction like we have, DFA'd Rowdy Tellez and Michael A. Taylor, and we've brought up Liover Figueroa and Joshua Palacios, and it's the end of
That's
the
the end of it.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah, and their thing is the end of the season, and most Pirates fans will probably, not even think twice about it. And if we didn't have an Ethan or somebody that was paying attention to that, because like I said, I remember talking about it during the offseason, but I only remember talking about it during the offseason after Ethan brought it up and put it out there that this had happened. And I was like, oh, yeah, I do remember talking about those incentives. But if he wouldn't have brought it up, I would have just been like, okay,
About time. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's about time. I mean, Rowdy, you like we said, you put together a few good months, but in the end, this is the end of a losing season. Most people are packing up their bags and ready to go home anyway. So and
And some of them
that's
are already home, mentally, like Oneil Cruz, but that's beside the point.
yeah. Yeah, and we can go right into that because I mean, there's a game that was played today, and Oneil Cruz does this to himself as well. Like if we're talking about Ben Cherington shooting himself in the foot, Oneil Cruz. I mean, there's that narrative out there that he's lazy, he's all these different things and stuff, and I don't believe that he is. I mean, they've kind of pointed out at times that he doesn't run out of the box fast because he's been told not to because he's had a little bit of a hamstring. He's coming back from a catastrophic, leg injury, different things like that. But talk about what you were seeing, during there, because we talked about it beforehand, and I know you wanted to bring it up.
Oh, it's frustrating because I was working today, and so I didn't get to watch the whole game. But it seemed like every time I turned on the game to kind of peek in, he was getting caught on the base paths. Uh, you know, Not a very big lead. They throw over to him for a pickoff. He instead of diving back in, he tries to just scoot back. He gets caught on the hand or the wrist or something, and he's picked off when he had what a step and a half lead. That was embarrassing. And then to get caught overrunning second on McCutcheon ground out to end the inning. And then they showed him as they came back from commercial because they didn't even catch the out on TV live, and they had to show it when they came back. And I guess he said, I thought there were two outs, and so his head just wasn't in the game. And you and I talked a little bit before we started recording. Is he detached from the game out in center field? Is that a concern? And it's always something that can be worked on. And that's the benefit of these big sports now. They have mental conditioning coaches. I'm sure they have focus coaches or people that are paid to help with these kind of mental things. But it's the end of the season. Is he going to stay around? Is he going to go back home to the Dominican? Is he thinking about? Because we talk. These are people, and is he standing out in center field and instead of focusing on the pitch like he might if he was, that much closer to the pitcher and home plate? Is he thinking out there, oh, my kid's in school, they got this thing going on, or I told my wife I'd pick up this thing after work? Is he just letting his mind lapse for a pitch at a time and just enough to get caught? Because I think in today's world, and I think this is something that I criticize social media for a lot, is that we treat these players like they're video game characters, that they should be perfect every time, if they should know what to do, and they should execute perfectly every time like they're a video game. And they're not. They're human beings whose mind can wander, who can make mistakes, who can overlook things. Um, I just think that is, for as talented as he is, and he has those flashes of greatness, that if there's a part of his game now that he's addressed hitting lefties, if there's a part of his game that he is going to be working on more or should be working on more, it's that attention to detail and that focus, the baseball IQ stuff.
Yeah, and we were talking about beforehand. I mean, I was at my son's Pony League game, and there was two kids that were out, overrunning, second base on steals where, I mean, they were safe. The throw wasn't there, but they overran and the kid just basically turned around and tagged them because it just that lapse. And I mean, that's the big thing like you're talking about is, staying engaged in the game. And like you said, it's something that could be worked on with a mental skills, or mental health skills coach or whatever they talk about them now. And the Pirates have one at every single level. But yeah, I mean, you should be engaged. It's, you're looking at that card. You could see some of the players, they look at the card. Where should I be moving? With each pitch, moving around, doing different stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good point just because I think, we also talked about, Alex Stump had written the article where, Oneil says, I have the time out there to think more, like be more focused on my hitting, and like you said, but it's like, are you missing other pieces of the game? And also, at this point in the season, is it, I get to go home and see my family in just a few days here. Do you know what I mean? And we're not in anything and we're basically going to end up in the same spot we did, last year without me, so I'm just kind of like, maybe I did think there were two outs just because, I may have missed something, but yeah, it's definitely something that if this team wants to be competitive, they have to be good on defense. They have to be good at base running. They have to do the little things correctly. And we've seen it from a lot of players, like, that hit to, the left side of the field to the third baseman, or I mean, to the shortstop, and they're running and they're getting caught at third base. I mean, just different things like that. I mean, I know that it happens to other teams, and we watch the Pirates a lot more, but yeah, these things that they do, it's like, if you're not going to do, certain things as good as other players, if you're not going to have a 40 or 50 home run hitter, if you're not going to, if you're going to strike out as much as you do, then there's things that you have to do. And it definitely has to be these little things. And like I said, we're fighting for the same record. I'm tired. Here's the thing is, I know that I will be upset on Sunday when I'm watching the fastest baseball game of the year, because the Pirates want to get out of New York. New York wants to get ready for their playoff game. The umpires, want to get this game over with. And I'll be sad when it's done. But yeah, I mean, at this point in time, it's like, I'm ready for the off season because I don't know what else there is to watch and to cheer for and to, really gain or gather, from these last like 3 games.
I'll be sad too, but I'll also be relieved a bit because, like, okay, well, maybe I could spend a little more time with my family instead of watching a baseball team lose. But then by the time the winter meetings come along, I'm, chomping at the bit. I want baseball back. It's that nice little break, especially when they're playing this way. If they were playing good baseball, then yeah, we're all for it. They're playing like the Brewers. Boy, it's just, you could really tell this past series. Just if you got dropped in, you can very clearly tell what team was ramping up for the postseason and what team was out of it and kind of gone already, mentally checked out, because that, I think, at all levels just seems to be the way this team has been playing for the last couple of weeks. It's just checked out.
And the thing that frustrates me about watching the Brewers series is that I looked around, the diamond, I looked in the outfield. I do know that they have some talented players and stuff, but I was not like overwhelmed by that team. Like, this is a clear cut, better than, like, much better than the Pirates, division winner by however many games. That's the part that maybe like is where I did get some of that emotion coming back in, where it's like, we should be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we should be able to have those players that are doing those different types of things. Like I said, they do have good players as well, but I mean, we have a Brian Reynolds, we have Joey Bart who performed well, we had Oneil Cruz who performed well, we have, Paul Skeens, for God's
Jared
sakes.
Jones, yeah.
Jared Jones. I mean, Mitch Keller for 90% of the season. Do you know what I mean? Like, we had, a lot of good players perform well during this season. And I think that's where kind of the frustration came in. But you could definitely tell, like you said, which team was ramping up and which team wasn't. And I mean, I kind of just threw it in there like off the cuff, but we knew we were going to talk about it. But like, man, Mitch Keller, like, he fell apart in the middle of last season. And I looked back and it was like right before the All-Star game, he had a couple bad starts. And then it continued for a few starts after that. But then he was, along with, Cabrian Hayes and his resurgence at the end of last season, was kind of one of the main reasons, along with, Oviedo and, the regular cast of characters and Reynolds, that is the reason why they actually finished, the way that they did, like, after the All-Star break and after the trade, like they were like over 500 for those points in time, instead of limping, like they did this year. And when they needed him, like, and it's not all Mitch's fault, I'm not putting it out that way, but it was like, we thought during that skid that we keep on bringing up that it's like, okay, Mitch is coming back out. The bats are kind of a little, he's a little bit hot at this point in time. They screwed up a Skeen start and, didn't give him any run support, but, Mitch, that's our next chance. And it was just like, boom, like it was just blew up and never looked like the same pitcher aside from, I think it was maybe down in Texas. He pitched really well for the one game. And then maybe against the Marlins, it was another game. And today wasn't like awful. I mean, it was like a good start. But he ends pretty much the same as he did last year, right around 2 WAR. Last year, I think he was a 4.21 ERA. This year, he's like a 4.25. I mean, obviously, he's not the ace of the staff. He was the ace of the staff by de facto before Skeen showed up. But us as fans, I don't think we ever thought he was an ace. But he has to be better than this if we want to contend.
He's not an ace, but he's a horse. He's going to take the ball every 5 days, and he's going to give you innings, and that you're going to be in the game when he takes the ball. And so I think that, Skeens is going to be a generational ace. And then I think, Jones, if he can maintain what he's doing, that's a real good number 2. And Mitch can be a really solid number 3 for us in the way that the things are constructed now. One that we'd be happy to have. And he's going to take the ball every 5 days and give you a chance to win. And pitching in this league now and the way the sport is, it is so golden. And so to have a rotation, as long as everybody stays healthy, to be in the position that we've been talking about pitching depth the last few weeks. But I think that Mitch is going to find his spot right there in the middle of that rotation. And if you can walk into a series and throw up Skeens, Jones, Keller, I think you're happy. Anytime you can do that, any team would be happy with that.
No, and I mean, even looking at like his starts, the number of times that he gave up, got completely blown up. It's 3 times, and it's 3 times in the last 2 months where he gave up like 8 runs, 7 runs. But even then, he's giving up 3 runs, 2 runs, 0 runs. I mean, he is still keeping you in the game. And I'm looking at it down here. It gives you like, the results of the games that he started. I mean, obviously he finishes 11-11, but they were 17-14 in the games that he started. It's just frustrating because I know that there's more in there for him. I mean, obviously we see it at times, haven't seen it for a complete season, but I think at this point in time, like, I know he pitched more innings last year, but I feel like he pitched tougher innings this year, if that kind of makes sense. Just because didn't have, as many strikeouts. Even today was a great example. I feel like he got behind in counts, went long into counts a lot more this season. So it kind of seems like maybe just wearing down a little bit. And I think, like you said, if you have him, he's part of your rotation. And I've always said, people will say, where does he fit in? Is he a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5? And I just basically say he's a 1 through 5. Like he's one of our 5. You eventually have to have, 5 pitchers. You have to have, a 5-man rotation, 6-man rotation at points in time. And Mitch will always be one of those 5. But I think that it's almost like, we had talked about previously, kind of with Brian Reynolds, is that Brian Reynolds has been the best player on the Pirates, for the past, well, pretty much since he's been here. He's been that best player on the Pirates. And so like, you're expecting, it's like, okay, he's going to be the all-star. He's going to be like the 6-WAR player. He's going to be whatever. Yeah, he's going to be a solid ball player. It's the same with Mitch. And, they are given these extensions. And I think that people also kind of look back to the McCutchen extension and like how like McCutchen was a freaking MVP candidate. He was like a 9, 10 more, what I mean? He was an absolute, and so they want these contracts to be steals for the team. They want them to be, they want them to outperform their contract. Which is the crazy thing, because then that's saving Bob Nutting money, and that's something that people don't want to do. But that's what they want them to do, is to outperform these contracts. But if he turns into a 2.5 WAR pitcher, and you're paying him $15 million in a year next year, then he's outperforming his contract. I mean, that's just kind of like what it is. And one thing we definitely don't want to forget, talking about maybe it's going to be a touchy off-season like subject, is going to be David Bednar's arbitration. Because I mean, I know we've been meaning to talk about, Bednar's struggles and different things like that, but a guy that has had a terrible season. And I think I just saw somebody put out there about, and it goes back to the Garrett Cole days, that when Garrett Cole, the Pirates used the thing that back when Chris and I used to do this show, we talked about is, I mean, there's the ability within the CBA to be able to not give the person a raise and actually pay them. I think it was about like, it was like not much money, but you could pay them less. And Garrett Cole, I kind of talked about how, he, had a fairly good season, and he went out the next year and got paid like, I think it was like $30,000 less or something. And that's something I'm thinking with like David Bednar, is usually in arbitration, your numbers go up because, if you've made it that far within your career, more than likely you've had like a pretty good season, not a non-tender candidate. If he wasn't from Pittsburgh, I'm not really sure if I want to bring that conversation up. Would he be a non-tender candidate? But I don't think that he is, just because of his track record, the injuries that happened this year. So I say some of that in jest, but I mean, they could honestly offer him less money this year.
Oh, absolutely. And I think back to the way arbitration is, and the Neil Walker situation, where the relationship between the organization and the player, from what I've heard, got really strained because of the case that was brought up against him in arbitration. So if I'm David Bednar, I let my agent handle that. I don't listen to anything that the team says. You kind of take it on the chin. And you're right, they could potentially try to. But if you want to spin this in a positive direction, because he has the strong track record, and you and I talked briefly about the Trevor May video where he was breaking down Bednar, was potentially tipping some of his pitches. These things might be fixable. Do the Pirates actually look at maybe extending Bednar based on his track record. Maybe you can get a deal there. Maybe you can get a bit of a steal of a contract. Um, Now, with relievers, that could be finicky, and you don't really want to dive too deep into that. But maybe this is an opportunity for them to lock down a hometown guy for a few more years and not strain that relationship through arbitration.
Yeah, or at least buy out the arbitration years and maybe
Mhm.
have an option or something, for that third year after that. And the other thing that I had kind of talked to you about like last time, and we had talked about obviously the Trevor May stuff, and I mean I looked at, and like I said, as something again, I believe it was Alex Stump at some point in time was talking about like his release points and tunneling, and different stuff like that. So I really wanted to go like deep into the numbers with him, through Statcast, and with pitching, there's that thing where it's disguising the ball. There's guys that are releasing the ball, from the same slot, the same angle, the same height, the same everything, but it's more of like the motion that they're giving with either their fingers, their hands, their elbows, whatever, but kind of, more deception in the ball. And the one thing I noticed about David Bednar this year was that he usually releases his curveball and his four seam fastball at around the same height. By his history, he releases that at 6 feet or above. So when he's bringing it in, it's all coming in at 6 feet or above. And so, like, it's basically looking like the same pitch no matter what because of where it's coming out of his hand and everything. And, those were a couple of his, more successful offerings. He obviously has, a couple other, he throws a change in there every once in a while, a two seam, but those are like, his two main pitches. And the thing that I noticed this year, and from the numbers and looking it up, is that he's still like throwing the fastball from the same height. Like, so the fastball is still coming in high, but he's throwing the curveball from about 5'9" which is, I mean, for people that can do math, I was told math would not be, part of this, is at least 3 inches lower than he normally would. And it's tunneling more with the two seam and the changeup, which he does not throw as often. So it's easier for a pitch. It's easier for somebody to know if it's more of one of his off speed pitches, because if you have your fastball up high, you have the curveball, you have the changeup, and you have your splitter, which is going to be a little bit, slower of your fastball offering, then it's going to be a slower pitch. If you notice, and I know that, we're not professional athletes here, but if you listen to a professional athlete talk about hitting, they can notice that stuff. They can pick up on that stuff because they're trained to do it. I mean, they're hitting a ball that they have to react to within milliseconds. Believe me, I think they can tell if a guy is using a different arm slot. And I think that's why for certain pitchers, that is so important to be so consistent, like a Bailey Falter in his delivery with his extension. He has to do like the same thing almost every single time. And for Bednar, I'm wondering, like I said, a piece of this, I don't know if this is his oblique. And when he is, reaching for a certain pitch or trying to throw a certain pitch, it's maybe he can't reach up as high or do whatever it is. So maybe that's the injury thing. Or, maybe he just got a little bit off kilter by just kind of getting, roughed up a little bit this season.
Yeah. And it comes back to the Astros thing with the trash can, right? The trash can indicated whether it was going to be off speed or not. And like you said, these professional hitters who eat, breathe, sleep baseball and hitting, they can, when they know that, they they can crush the ball. That's that little bit of an advantage that they need. And if they, whether it's like you were saying, the release point, not tunneling it, or in the Trevor May video, the way he digs in for the grip, and you can see his glove move a little bit, or you see his wrist just flinch a little bit. And you're right. They know what to look for, and they can notice those things. That's something that us not being professional athletes and us not as big of baseball fans as we are, we don't have the same attention to detail. We're not in at the same level that these guys are. I think it can be hard for us to wrap our heads around that. So just having that bit of an advantage of knowing if it's going to be an off speed or if it's going to be fastball, that could make the difference for that at bat.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, something to look at, something to discuss. I mean, we're going to have plenty of time to discuss a lot of topics. Hopefully, the Pirates don't make national news. The only way they would do that, I mean, at this point in time, is maybe giving up, I don't know, 6 or 7 home runs to like Aaron Judge, during this series. But at least we would be seeing parts of history being made or whatever it may be. But yeah, man, it's just like I said, I'm happy in some ways it's going to be over, but I'm obviously, as every baseball season for the Pirates ends, I'm going to be sad.
Yeah, even the worst seasons that I've sat through, I was still in that mixture of sadness and relief. The season is over. The suffering is done, but you miss it. You miss actually sitting down.